welcome to Culture Night,
where each week we drink fancy wine and watch popular movies that are in some way culturally significant. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sarah, and we want to say thank you again to everybody who's listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and to everybody that's watching on YouTube. And if you are enjoying this podcast so far, if you want to like, subscribe, give us a rating,
that notification bell,
all the things that we're supposed to say.
Yeah, all those things.
So
just do all of them on all the platforms.
Just do all the things. We're back for episode 5.
Yeah, we made it.
5 already.
Mm-hmm.
It's honestly gone by pretty fast.
Yeah.
So now we're gonna
still making our way in the world, but
yeah.
5 would stay. So the average gets to 7 episodes. Mm-hmm. So got a couple more before we beat the average, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah. So far,
plenty of movies left to watch.
Like we said last week, our backlog is off the charts.
Yeah.
Please
send in more recommendations too if anyone has any suggestions on anything on Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. Let us know if there's anything, because there's no harm in adding more to the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's each week it's a what do we watch, and kind of scrolling through, and we've looked at our movies so many times that it's always good to have a few extra.
Yeah.
All right, ready to jump into our podcast business?
Podcast business, let's go.
All right, so I had a lot of things to say about the movie last week. I still kind of feel mostly the same way about the movie in general. I think it's hard in the 2020s to get past a lot of the stereotyping and the racism and the language. It does not stand up today. After having slept on it, though, I appreciate a lot more of the comedy and the overall setting and I feel like a lot of the things they were doing from like a cinematography or like a comedic filmmaking standpoint seemed kind of new. I mean, we haven't watched many movies before 1974, so I might stand corrected in future episodes, but I feel like I appreciate the revolutionariness of it. And
well, I think that's kind of the purpose of this podcast, right? Is to kind of get a view of like what the culture was like at that time, and like what was acceptable in movies, what was considered comedy, or how things were played, how they influenced, or how things have kind of changed over time, and seeing that. And yeah, I think especially you going into it completely blind, it was pretty jarring, and probably a lot of like the first 30 minutes were probably you being like, wait, what am I watching? Is this a comedy? Is this like, I can't believe they're saying that, doing that? And I very much I kind of knew what to expect going into it. But I especially for you not knowing any of that, I'm sure that was a lot to take in.
Yeah. So I will raise my rating a little bit. I think it was like a 4.2 or low 4s is what I said last week. And I am bumping it up to a 5.8 from a movie standpoint of all the like parts and pieces that go into what makes a movie and the comedic style and those kinds of things. It's just also not really still my kind of movie in general. So I'm not going to give it some crazy rating because it's just not my style, but I am appreciating the
and I think it was okay, like from comedy, for how much it held up today. I don't think any rating higher than that would be warranted unless you were someone who just unless you were just doing it because it was like it's a iconic classic movie. Like it really isn't that great. But yeah, so speaking of the culture of the time, we kind of want to start incorporating some kind of like tidbits of like what was popular at the time that some of these older movies were made. So the top grossing movies from 1974, number 1 being Blazing Saddles, 2 and 3, Towering Inferno, and then Trial of Billy Jack, I have not heard of. Number 4, Young Frankenstein, is another Gene Wilder movie, so he must have been pretty busy that year. But what I found was interesting was all the way down to number 6 was The Godfather Part 2, which I don't know if it just came out late in the year so it didn't have time to gross that much, or if it just wasn't that popular at the time. But I'm excited to eventually get to some of those really big iconic movies to kind of see what those were like.
It doesn't surprise me that Young Frankenstein is on the list, though, just in the last 7 days of me doing research on Blazing Saddles in general, and we were talking last week about, was this an iconic cast, or were they like young stars that were getting ready to do a lot of things? And we know that they went on to have big careers, Mel Brooks.
Well, I think the executioner from that scene, I think he played Igor, is that the assistant for Frankenstein?
So,
I think
like that.
From what I saw of like a little snapshot of Young Frankenstein, I think he might have played that. So I think that might have actually been like a reference to another movie or something in there. So it might have been kind of like I wonder how much of the cast overlaps between those two. If it's like some of those, ensembles that stick together throughout like several movies where like Adam Sandler and oh my God, what's his face? Rob Schneider.
Yes.
Can't draw a blank now. Ron Phil.
Yeah, so this sounds like another deep dive for another day.
Yeah.
That once we get more into these Gene Wilder, Mel Brooks genre of movies.
Excited to add that one. Hopefully we can do that one soon. We're not doing it tonight, spoiler alert, but I think that is one I would like to do kind of soon in the next couple of weeks. The top 3 songs were The Way We Were by Barbra Streisand, Seasons in the Sun by Terry Jacks, and Love's Theme by Love Unlimited Orchestra. I can't say I've heard any of those songs.
Okay, that makes me feel better because I was
but I
like,
know who Barbra
"Ooh."
Streisand is.
Yes.
That's about it.
My thought process exactly when I read that list was I've heard of Barbra Streisand and I don't know any of these songs.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be a lot more interesting with movies like in the later 80s and 90s with more songs that we know. But yeah, that's a little glimpse into 1974. And the next thing I have on my list is going back to the movie and while we were talking about it with friends and family of what movie we watched. I found it interesting when I told my parents what we watched. I expected them to be like, "Oh my God, we love that movie! It's so great! We've seen it 100 times." Because they quoted it and referenced it and talked about it. And my dad's apparently never seen it all the way through. He said, and my mom had no recollection of the entire ending, which I get it. It's very different from the rest of the movie, and kind of you could kind of like segment that into its whole separate thing where it just goes off the rails. But I just found that really interesting that it, from the way I kind of had heard it talked about, that it wasn't as memorable or as well watched as I thought it had been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did not talk to my parents about this one this week, but I have enjoyed, like when we watched The Graduate, I talked to them about it afterwards, and I feel like it's really interesting to be able to talk to people who were born in different decades and or teenagers or adults in different decades, and kind of getting a more well-rounded idea of how this movie was perceived by them at the time. And I think that's why I love this podcast and this idea so much. Is it's love
to hear from our subscribers too.
It's such a conversation starter.
Yeah,
you and me and like 2 other people.
Yeah, no, but if I'd love to hear more from anyone about any of these movies, because a lot of them you know nothing about, or I know little about, or definitely didn't see it to appreciate it in its time. I'd love to hear some bits about like, oh, I went to see that on my first date or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like those kinds of stories are really cool. Yeah. And then so
you did some research.
I did some research. I did some little deep dives.
Blazing Saddles. Yeah.
Yeah, we're sticking with Blazing Saddles right at the beginning of this, just because there was a couple things we talked about during the podcast that kind of we've talked about before that I've wanted to learn more about, and just some other things that just spurred some deep dives.
I think it's good to have some stuff on it, because a lot of times it's just our raw thoughts, and on purpose, I don't do too much research before the movie because I don't want to spoil it. I kind of want to see it raw. So it's good that we kind of have some time to then go back, do some research, to kind of look a little different lens or something. Yeah.
So the first thing that I did a little deep dive on was quicksand, because we mentioned last week that we both kind of grew up thinking that quicksand was something that we were going to encounter a lot as adults.
You walk down the street, oh my God, it's quicksand. Like, oh, you hear about that guy got stuck in quicksand last week.
And so it was something that we independently had thought our whole lives. And so I started just by Googling quicksand, and the first thing that popped up was an article from National Geographic. So, it's legit. And I didn't really read, I didn't go too deep on this dive. It was a very surface level deep dive. But basically the quote from the article that I pulled was, according to a study published in the current issue of the journal Nature, it is impossible for a person immersed in quicksand to be drawn completely under. The fact is, humans float in the stuff. So it is not as deadly as we were led to believe. Basically, because we're denser than water. Water, the quicksand is denser.
Quicksand would be denser, yeah.
So we would float, and you would be stuck in it, and the only thing that would really cause you to die from it would be dehydration, starvation, hypothermia, or sun exposure, because you're stuck in it and you can't get out.
Or just being too drunk to know what you're doing, lose all body control,
so
fall face down into it,
you wouldn't
really trying to get hurt.
Be completely submerged in it so that it would suffocate you. So the movies do not portray it correctly. And then I found one other article. Well, the guy self-refer to it as an essay. So I can tell you I did not read the entire thing because it was very, 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 very long. But basically, it starts off by him saying that he grew up thinking that he was going to encounter quicksand a lot. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what we thought. And he then apparently, I think this article came out in like 2010 or 2011, and he asked a bunch of elementary school kids, and they were like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm not afraid of quicksand, or I've not heard of it. Like, it seems like it's kind of died out in today's age. And so he did a really deep dive on quicksand, and apparently there are some quicksand enthusiasts out there, and they have watched tons and tons of movies and collected all this data about all the times that it was referenced over the years. And I will put the graph in our Instagram stories, but they have a graph of how often it was shown in movies and when it peaked. And it peaked in the 60s. About 3% of movies in the 60s reference quicksand in some way, shape, or form. And then it was like nothing, and then it was a pretty sharp increase. Yeah. And I think because it was an easy effect to do without having the technology we have today.
Well, even in the movie, they kind of made it look like a joke. It was kind of like, how hard can this be to fall? They were just kind of standing there. That I think maybe they were probably making fun of that whole thing there. But has this guy done similar research on like tidal waves and volcanoes and nunchucks?
I don't know, but I will see if he has any further essays.
You can read more about that.
But it's like a steep decline from there. So we are not alone in thinking that quicksand was something that would be around a lot. At least one other person out there.
Mentioned anymore.
And so that was my quicksand deep dive. And then one other reference back to Blazing Saddles is we were talking while we were watching it about the ending and how like maybe there was an alternate ending when it was originally released because they break out of the true movie and they're on the Warner Brothers lot and they go to the Chinese theater.
And they basically go to the premiere of that movie or something like.
And so we were like, maybe they had some kind of live reenactment during the real premiere. So I googled Blazing Saddles premiere, and although what we thought did not happen, they had a pretty dope premiere as it is. So on February 7th, 1974, the premiere of this movie was at a drive-in theater in Burbank, California.
So not the Chinese theater.
So it was not a Chinese theater. But instead of having cars drive in, everybody that came, including all the main stars of the movie, came in on horseback. So really leaning into the movie theme. And at this drive-in, they had a hospitality bar set up for all of the guests to get their snacks from, and the bar also served hors d'oeuvres. There are also some pretty funny pictures from the article that I read all this in. I'll also link all of that in our Instagram stories. But
I wonder if any movies do anything similar to that nowadays. I feel like it'd be a huge easy publicity thing to do.
Right, Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder and Cleveland Little and all of them just riding in on horseback with all the other guests. I mean, I'd be quite a red carpet.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Hollywood, just about for you. So
crazy.
That was my deep dives into Blazing Saddles.
Yeah. Crazy.
We'll see what else we get from future movies, but I learned a lot.
Yeah. So last bit of podcast business is that hopefully this is our last podcast without dedicated microphones. Right now we're relying on a Rode video mic, and I think the quality is not atrocious. Probably doesn't help that we have nothing on the walls, not in this basement yet. We're still kind of setting up our set. Hopefully someday match the Tuxedo Time level of detail and some full quality set. But we at least will get our Rodecaster Pro and some Rode pod mics soon. So hopefully sound a little bit better, especially for those listening just audio only. Get a little bit of that deeper, more sexy voice.
And now that we've talked for so long, I'm very ready to taste this wine.
Yeah. So what are we drinking tonight?
Tonight, you have the bottle. We are drinking the Tobin James 5.
For our 5th episode.
For our episode
How fitting.
5. Yes. This wine is special to us because we got the our first bottle of 5, not this one, when we first started dating, and we saved that bottle for 5 years until our 5th dating anniversary. So we drank that a couple of years ago. So it's been a while since we've had a 5, but I'm excited to break into another.
5s are delicious. It's for the 5 varietals, which is Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, which we love, Merlot, Malbec, and Cabernet Franc, which is also my favorite.
We also love, yes.
Yes. Just need some Petit Syrah and it'd be perfect.
So another 2013, another 10-year-old bottle of wine. I mean, who knew we had such a stash?
Yeah. What happens when you're hoarders? Ooh, that's...
Dark cherry, vanilla.
Yeah, I was going to say definitely dark. I almost got smoky at first, but then I didn't get it the second.
It's a smoky dark cherry. I got smoky after you said it.
So like some raisin.
Mm-hmm. Almost like a little bit of coffee, like coffee bean.
Mm-hmm.
Caffeine. The taste matches the smell pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we've had some lately that haven't.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of tastes like everything we just kind of called out. A little bit like
It's not super alcohol.
Yeah,
forward.
it's like a raisin level of sweetness, not too sweet or anything.
This is good. Can't wait to drink this one. Yum.
Yeah, I don't really have any more to add. That's really good though.
Yeah.
Definitely recommend the
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right, and so now that we've dove into that, what are we watching tonight?
We are watching The Jerk from 1979. What do you, or have you seen it before?
I have not seen it before. Have you seen it before?
I have, but it's again been like a decade since I've seen it. So obviously, not to give too much away, but Steve Martin obviously is in it.
That's all I know about it is Steve Martin's in it.
He looks the same as he does today because he reached max age like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think you're gonna like it. It's. I mean,
what's not to love about Steve Martin?
Yeah.
Do you want to hear what my expectations of this movie are?
I want to hear your prediction.
So, I've seen the movie poster, and by seen it I mean as we were scrolling through a list trying to pick what movie to watch this week. So, I don't really know a whole lot, but my having zero idea what this is about, just my guess based on the title and that it's Steve Martin, is that either he is like some kind of annoying neighbor, or like he has an annoying neighbor who like picks on him all the time and is a jerk in some capacity. I imagine it will be a comedy and be entertaining.
It's a horror movie.
My nightmare, literally. And that it's probably more of, I say dark humor, but more of that like boy type humor, like not just like just trying to get in a little of the dirty jokes and the dirty like tricks or pranks on other people. I have no context for that. That's just, if I had to pick something, that would be my guess of what it's going to be. I hate this because you have some idea and you're just
what do
looking
you want me to do? Like, you want me to tell you yes or no?
No,
I
I
just sit there and
don't.
just kind of like nod. And be like,
it's just awkward, giving me eyes. But I'm excited. I wasn't sure how I wanted to take this week as far as what the movie went, to go like totally different. I do kind of want to switch it up from the 70s next week, but I am excited that we're staying in the same decade within 5 years and a similar style, like comedy. I don't know how similar the movies are going to be, but and just I think this one will be a good one to compare with last week, just coming from a similar time period.
I do want to do Young Frankenstein in the next like week or two though, just before we fully go out of the 70s. I'd like to, while it's still kind of fresh, do that. But yeah, I'm excited to kind of jump around a little bit too. Time travel.
Ooh. Potential name change? No.
Culture Night's what we got until we get sued.
True. All right, so I'm ready to jump into episode 5. What about you?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's go.
All right, The Jerk.
The Jerk. I was wrong.
Yeah, just a little bit. That's why I was like so interested when you were like giving your prediction of just like, sure, I'm just gonna let you keep talking.
I had to pick something,
Yeah,
I was kind of imagining more along the like Dennis the Menace vibes, but like the adult version.
And what you were saying, I was like, that seems like a plausible explanation for it.
Like in like a 1970s plot.
Especially if you're like coming from this of like the Father of the Bride aspect of it, like that could be a good like before he did Father of the Bride, this led into it. But,
Oh, we gotta put that on our list. I've seen it 1,000 times, but it's so good.
So before we get to that though, the wine.
The wine.
Scale of 1 to 10.
So good.
Wine. The
2013. 5. Tobin James. Very pleasant the whole time. I feel like we've had some where like first sip's good, second sip's good, and then it kind of gets kind of alcohol-y and like not as great. I give this one a 6.8.
6.8. I give it an 8.2.
Ooh.
It was.
And I think we're kind of probably.
So before we say anything, we need to also explain the scale. This is not a scale of like 0 being like the worst wine ever. Like a 0 is like this is a weighted scale, I guess, or it's
0 is not like
0 is still a good wine,
like a Franzia
yeah
type wine.
It's not shit water to like best wine that costs like $20,000. This is like on a scale of like 0 being like it's good, absolutely nothing remarkable about it, to a 10 being like the best ever. So an 8.2 is a fairly high score.
Yes, it is very high, which like I couldn't put it that high because I feel like I've had some experiences with some wines, like drinking that one Tobin James Petit Syrah on the PCH.
I do, like now that I said my scale, I do want to reconsider it, and not because of your number, but because I feel like anything above an 8 is like a really good wine.
Yeah. And like
and we've had some really good wines.
And that was a great wine.
Yeah.
And like, so when I say 6.8, I mean it with like the most sincere, like I very much enjoyed that whole bottle. I will say the sediment at the end, not so great.
Yeah.
It was only the last sip, and that was probably because it's.
And I didn't get the sediment, she got all of it.
Yeah. That's because it's a 10-year-old wine, and we've had it stored probably not so great over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But flavor was good.
So between when I said that I was going to change the score and when you said 6.8, I'd forgotten that your score was 6.8, but that was the number that came to mind second. When I was drinking it, I think I would rate it on a scale being 0 being like crap wine to 10 being like, I think that's where I'd put it at 8.2, but thinking of the scale again, 6.8 sounds right.
Yeah. It's
6.8 is still very good.
Am I truly gonna like remember the taste of this wine forever? No. But that's nothing against the wine itself. I enjoyed every taste of it. It was wonderful. The flavor was really good. Like the nose was really good.
There was nothing off about it or off-putting. It just I feel like I was expecting a little more like complexity to the flavor of it, and it was good. I liked everything that I got out of it from the nose and the actual taste of it. Just nothing out of this world. So I think 6.8 is about right. It was good. Highly recommended. Very good wine. Isn't going to make you like bring a tear to your eye by drinking it, but still very good.
And I want us to try to drink another 5, maybe for 10, episode 10, just because it's been since right at 3 years ago since we've had another 5.
I thought we've had 2 of the 5s.
I don't think we have.
We only had the 1.
I think we've only had the 1. We have probably 5 or 6 of them. That
we have 5 5s.
I think we have 5 left now. Yeah. That like I want to have one sooner just to see how much we really enjoy.
I think we get like generally about 1 per shipment. This is the Black Box post.
The after
show wine. It's the Pinot Noir.
I can drink it now that we've rated the wine because normally I take a sip of this and then I forget everything about the other wine.
And it's crazy because like the 5 is very good, and you're like, yeah, it was great, nothing to write home about. It was really good. You taste this, and not that the Black Box is not good, but also it's just so much more like suppressed. There's like not as much going on that it's complex. you can tell the difference between and I
had a glass of the Black Box the other day without having like a nice wine before or after it, and I was like, this is very good. Like this is a perfect like end of the day. Been with the kids all day. Like I'm having a glass of wine.
I've had way worse boxed wine.
It's
Black
very
Box
good.
Is very good.
But then when you have something like really good, it and I think that's why it's so hard to give this scale rating is then you go to this, which is not even really on the scale. Yeah. Like I don't know. It's a tough job we have here.
Like I said, it's not that it's bad. I feel like the range is compressed. The highs aren't as high, but also the lows aren't low at all. It's a good after show wine. Highly recommend Black Box. Please sponsor us for the after show. So moving on, the movie out of 10.
I'll let you give your score first. I did wine first.
I'm gonna go 7.7.
Really?
Yeah. I thought they were a good, legitimate laughs.
Not that I completely disagree with you at all. I just we don't talk about this at all beforehand, so it's just.
Well,
really
first, what's your rating?
Mine was a 6.
A 6.
6 even.
6 even. See, I thought it was good. I thought the storyline was pretty good. Especially, I think for its time, it also would have been a lot better. I think it influenced a lot of movies, and we'll get to that in the show notes or the notes. But I thought it was good. It was still interesting to watch. Some of the lines were still very much funny to this day. Didn't seem super forced in a lot of ways. Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't dislike it. I kind of feel like it's similar to The Wine. Like, do I really want to watch it again multiple times? Not really. I think again, kind of like last week, like I'm going to take a lot from this, and I'm excited to build on having this in my movie repertoire now. But it was just okay. I mean, I did laugh. I did enjoy the storyline, and I have a lot more notes and things to say once we get in a little deeper.
Not to like
into it,
fully get too in depth on a scale or anything, but I feel like anything above a 6 means like if I'm just flipping channels, not that I ever do that, but flipping channels, it's on TBS. It's like a third of the way through. Yeah, I'd probably give it an hour. It's good.
Yeah.
That's more for rewatchability, but like overall, like I liked it, enjoyed it. It was good. Yeah. So that's the rating.
Just at a glance rating.
Yeah. So next the
description.
The Wikipedia description, or no, I guess
we've kind of moved on to this. Yeah. You have to give yours first. So
okay,
what's your overview plot summary?
My description is that Steve Martin, his character's name is Naven. He's recapping his life from growing up, from like leaving his home, where he was very poor, thought he was black, and he thought he was black. And then he goes out into the world, starts out at the very bottom. He's very naive about everything. Works his way up from like a job to another job as working at a carnival, and suddenly some person that he'd met previously who'd given like some help to, turns out that invention that he had actually was sold for millions and millions, makes a whole lot of money, has this whole over-the-top grandiose lifestyle. Turns out that his invention had some side effects. He gets sued for it, loses everything, and then ends up doing okay in the end because his poor family had been sending money back to the whole time, had invested that money, and he is able to recoup that. Obviously, it's a lot more of a comedic take on all of those various stops along the way, and yeah.
I feel like I need to probably put like spoilers included in these podcasts now that I like really sit down and listen to your descriptions.
We kind of tell people watch the show and then watch our after show kind of thing.
True. That's true.
So yeah, if you haven't seen it, it's been out since 1979. That's more on you than on us. I'm sorry.
That's true. Yeah, we expect that you watch it beforehand, but just spoilers. And going off that, the description on the TV of this movie is, after discovering he's not really black like the rest of his family, likable dimwit Naven Johnson runs off on a hilarious misadventure in this comedy classic that takes him from rags to riches and back to rags again. The slap-happy jerk strikes it rich, but life in the fast lane isn't all it's cracked up to be, and in the end, all that really matters to Johnson is his true love.
That's basically what I said.
A little bit more concise, exactly of what you said. You gave a little more detail.
Language.
You gave a little more detail of what the stops on the way. But yeah, overall, that's the summary of the show, the movie.
The movie.
That's the summary of the movie.
Rotten Tomatoes rating, by the way, 83%. The star rating, I don't know where that comes from, 6.9.
Crushed it!
So kind of like, about halfway between what we rated it? Maybe?
Oh, no, I gave The Wine a 6.8. I thought you gave the movie. My bad.
Yeah.
It is exactly pretty much between the two of us.
So next up was the movie what you expected?
Obviously not.
Having seen it, it was exactly what I remembered.
Not what I expected, but at the same time, like my guess of it was just like I saw one picture of the movie, pulled something out of nothing, and just gave a guess of it. Am I totally surprised by any of it? No. Like it was not what I guessed it would be in the before show, but
yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone's gonna look at the title and see Steve Martin and be like, yes, this is what I'm going to guess. It was very, very random, not random, but like different than what you would expect based on the title and the character.
Yeah, but it doesn't surprise me coming from when it came from. It seems like very much a storyline that they would have written into a movie in the 70s.
I'm going to go a little out of order on our order of questions though, and just go to did they say the title of the movie? And they definitely did. Mm-hmm. He says it like in the very first like minute. They don't really say it much later until he calls himself a jerk. Mm-hmm. But that leads me to the next question of did the title fit the movie? Mm-mm. And I don't think it did at all.
Not at all. It fit the title of the movie that I made up.
Because also he was so like lovably naive, where he was just stupid. He wasn't really being a jerk, especially on purpose. That didn't really lead to any of this at all. So unless jerk had like a different meaning in 1979.
Yeah, I don't think that.
I don't think the title fit it at all. I don't know what else you would have called it, but
yeah, I can't come up with a good other name off the top of my head. But I don't. I was just thinking when you were giving the description, I was like, I just still don't really know where they got the title of this movie from. And just
like
thinking like
falling upwards, or something like about like how you like inadvertently succeed to an extent. I feel like would fit more. The jerk didn't feel like it fit at all.
But I also don't really know what about this title would really entice me to go to the movies to see it in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I mean, unless they had like really good trailers that like brought you in.
Steve Martin really big before this? I don't know. He was pretty young. I looked at it.
I feel like this is a good deep dive for next week. It's just like a little bit early of Steve Martin's career.
I did look just because he's already so gray. Like, not that I'm really going to talk, but he was 34 in this.
I did peek at your notes, and that's the one note I saw was that he was 34, and I was like, oh man, that's crazy. He was already so gray, and then I realized it was next to you.
Thanks. Well,
you look good, and hey, if Steve Martin can pull it off his whole life, it's not a bad person to.
But it was just interesting to think that he has looked like that. I feel like forever.
And like I read that note, and it's pretty early on in the movie, and I'm watching it and just thinking like, but he looks exactly the same as he does now. I mean, he's a little whiter, obviously now, but overall, he's not changed really at all.
I feel like, and that kind of segues into our next question of. How well did it age and could it be made today? I feel like he could just pop right into it in character, like, and it would be like picking up like the next day. Mm-hmm. Probably no other actor like could be in it, or half of them are probably not even alive anymore. But he could very much with like a tiny bit of makeup,
just drop him right in there.
A little bit of like airbrush effect would look exactly the same. But how well did it age? And could it be made today? Besides the fact that Steve Martin could just hop right in.
Steve Martin could make it for sure. I think it was overall aged pretty well. I mean, there was definitely it was not as like overly aggressive as last week, Blazing Saddles. It obviously started with a lot of race-based humor, which I don't know would be received very well today. I mean, it was not terrible.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything that really would have over like from a high level like plot line, storyline, anything that would have made it super unmakeable today. Some things obviously would need to be tweaked, but for the most part, it's like, especially the idea that he strikes it rich on some stupid idea and becomes like a billionaire overnight, like that I feel like is the whole like premise of half the Silicon Valley like startups is like you do one stupid thing, something takes off, you make a whole lot of money, and then you lose it because of something stupid like the next day. I feel like that could very much be the storyline there. It would be like a computer or technology related idea. And I think otherwise it could have been made. There were some things they would have not fully copied over, like some of the racial tones I think would have been a little bit different, at least.
I think that's the like, did it age well? Like some of the racial stuff didn't age great, but it was not like as aggressive as last week. Blazing Saddles was just like really in your face and really uncomfortable and a lot of stereotyping, and there was still some stereotyping here. I don't feel as uncomfortable. Maybe if we'd watched these reversed, I would have felt a little caught off guard by this one, and then really caught off guard by Blazing Saddle. But having seen this after this, it feels
and one thing I think that probably would have been different though is the trying to see, does it say what it was rated? I don't see it up there. I think they probably would have also toned down the fact that like when he got rich, he bought a whole bunch of like paintings with like topless women.
Oh, the movie rating? Yeah. Oh, because I did actually make a note of that because I was reading it at the very end. It's rated R.
Rated R.
And I was wondering because I had actually went back and rewound it because it popped up at the very end, and I feel like that's something we should start paying attention to because it's not something I've really thought about. Especially like when you're a kid, you're like, this movie's rated PG-13. Oh my god, or like oh my gosh, this movie's rated
PG-13 also
R.
used to be a lot more like they used to do a lot more PG-13 than they do today.
Mm-hmm. But when you're a kid and you can't watch it because you're not 13,
Mm-hmm.
you know, those things feel like so much more of a big deal that I hadn't even thought about movie ratings in so long that it popped up and I was like, oh, let me see if so I had to rewind it to see if they had said like why it was rated R, gave any kind of detail, and they really didn't. But I would like to kind of start paying attention more to the ratings.
But I
of
think
these
nowadays,
movies.
like movies try to like stay under that R rating because they want to appeal to like a larger audience. And so I think a lot of things with like him buying the art, they would have made it not something with like tits in it because they wouldn't have wanted to have to deal with the R rating. They would have kept it just below that bar just to maximize profitability, which I feel like waters down a lot of like, you know, movies and the creative freedom they have because like you go one step too far. You say fuck one too many times. Sorry for anyone watching this with kids, but like you know, it goes just that cross that line and suddenly the amount of money you make from a PG-13 versus an R movie changes. Whereas I feel like if you're going to make an R-rated movie nowadays, you lean heavily into like, let's go to the end of the spectrum of just how many curse words and nudity and all that stuff we can put into it because we want to get our money's worth for that rating. But this was R. I guess that makes sense.
It seems like an R movie.
Yeah.
I do think that maybe we should start talking about the rating of these movies just because I think it'll be interesting to see how they change over the years and like how much more extreme the R plus gets and all that kind of stuff. But that was my very last note, was that it was rated R, and I was going to talk about how just not something that I really thought about for any of the previous movies.
Were there any actors that went on to do bigger things?
Steve Martin.
Steve Martin, obviously.
This has to be very early on in his career. He is obviously still very present
77
and
today, still acting in
just
things.
crushing it today. Bernadette Peters is in a lot of things. I saw his name, but the guy who was in Christmas with the Cranks.
Yeah, I wouldn't know if I'd call that like bigger things, but he definitely like still acted 20 plus years later. The hitman that turned into a private detective played the neighbor in Christmas with the Cranks. Basically played a very similar character in Christmas with the Cranks. I don't know if he was typecast as that or that's what he just wanted to play.
I'm kind of mad that character didn't come back again in the movie. Like, I'm glad he came back a second time, but I feel like a third time would have really completed his character arc in the movie. Just side note.
Yeah. What impact do you think this movie had on pop culture?
I mean, I think it was just like the beginning of Steve Martin's career, and I mean, one of my notes is that he's the same, more or less, than he. I mean, I have some other notes to comment out on that in a minute, but like, I think you see the foundations of where he goes with his acting and his career and his comedy over the years.
Yeah, I think it's kind of influenced a lot of movies in a lot of ways. This movie, I don't know if it directly, like I felt directly referenced it, but I think this style of movie is very recurrent in Steve Martin movies. It's like he wasn't fully narrating it, but he kind of did give a narration as he was talking through it. He might have narrated. I don't know if I paid full attention to that, but at some point he was telling
Father of the Bride. He starts off at the beginning and then the end. I'm trying to think like. I mean, I know him also from like Cheaper by the Dozen, and I kind of feel like there's narration in that too. That I don't know if that's like I don't know how much of that is
his idea, or if that's more just what Steve Martin like happened to be in movies that happened to have like some sort of narration pushing the story forward.
Another thing for us to watch.
But I think it definitely influenced a lot of movies, and I'll talk about that in my notes of movies that I feel like that reminded me of, at least, or that I got a lot of familiarity with. Do you feel cultured after watching it?
I do. And I say yes, especially more thinking back on last week where I said no, I didn't feel cultured. That's because I really went really blind into last week, not even knowing who was in it or what kind of movie it was. And I at least knew this was probably a comedy because it was Steve Martin. And I don't know that he does anything other than comedies.
Had you heard of The Jerk before? Or
I maybe had, but I mean, it was not something that really stuck out to me in my mind. But I also feel like having watched a 1970s movie last week that I see a little bit of like similar styles and a little bit of like overlapping and things. And I appreciate where like this is going to be a foundation for something else. And I'm appreciating what do you feel cultured means.
Yeah. And I think what I'm getting more from this that I didn't get the first time I watched it like 10 plus years ago is that I feel like I can see where this influenced a lot of movies. and this what came out in what 79.
Yes.
I think it did kind of like start bridging the gap between like 70s movies and 80s movies for whatever that really means. We'll probably figure that out more as we go along.
I'm really excited to get into the 80s.
Yeah, but it felt like it was kind of transitioning into a different style maybe of movie. But I definitely see this as kind of like the root of a lot of further ideas that
comedy and all that kind of stuff. Do you want to do your notes first, or do you want me to go first?
So I guess I think you went first last week with your notes.
I think so. Because I was so blind last week, I had to talk first.
Yeah, I'll start out. I don't have too many notes compared to previous weeks, but I do want to there's one I think that I'll probably talk about a lot. First, I thought it was funny that the tab cola in the beginning. I feel like we watched a YouTube video about like cola wars, or maybe I watched it about like tab, and I think it was apparently discontinued relatively recently, but like it was like, it felt like a real like, this is back in like the 70s / early 80s, like when it became really popular as like a soda, back when there used to be more than just like Coke versus Pepsi.
And I mean, I've had it many times in my life, and actually back in the days when I used to drink a lot of soda, I very much enjoyed Tab, and I think I think it's because my parents really liked it and they would buy it all the time.
I could see that.
I mean, they were probably similar, a little younger than Steve Martin, but kind of that similar generation. And as soon as I saw the Tab, my brain immediately was like, oh, I love Tab.
Well, it was the whole like being marketed as like sugar-free, and I feel like that was maybe like the first like real like sugar-free, be healthy, exercise with soda type thing that I can see that being like kind of a cultural like icon of those times. I feel like the 80s got really big into the whole like fitness vibe, and I could see a Tab being like 60s, 70s, and then like going really big in the 80s and being a sign of that time.
And kind of on that similar note, I do feel like there was a lot of like product placement, and not a ton that was like super obnoxious like certain movies, but there was the Tab and the Twinkies and the Mr. Bubbles when he was in the bathtub. Is that what it's called? I can see the logo in my head.
And probably some of the automotive brands when he was at the gas station.
And even the like the graffiti on the wall in the bathroom when he was in there with the manager thinking that it was his home. It said like Ford Rules and had some like car name brands on it that like I think there was some like subtle product placement in there, which I feel like is probably something we're going to start seeing a lot more as we I mean, I know we're not really on a specific path of going from the 70s straight through to now, but it's something we'll see more in the like 80s and 90s as capitalism takes over.
Yeah, definitely not going down, if anything. The fact that Steve Martin was only 34, we talked about that. So in the beginning, I felt like this really influenced Elf with Will Ferrell.
That's one of my notes too.
Like,
all I thought the whole time was like, this is like
where he it grows up thinking something else, finds out like, oh, he's actually not black. It's like just his buddy finding out that he's not an elf. He's very naive, very dumb, like goes out into the world, travels. Like it almost felt like this was just a huge, like Elf was a big ripoff of this. And that's more where I feel like the most, like I feel cultured seeing that is like this, seeing Elf, I kind of view Elf differently now. It's like, it feels
I'm kind of mad you at first. I was really proud of myself for coming up with the Elf reference. No, I totally felt the same way. And like, it was hard because it was like, obviously like, the Christmas innocent North Pole type story. But then as soon as I realized that, which was probably in the first like 15-20 minutes that my brain kind of connected the two movies together, and then I couldn't unsee it, and then it just kept going, and he just was so then as soon as you said naive when you were giving your description, I was like, that's exactly the word. He just,
and like the way he trusts the dog shithead to like with the fire thing almost feels like the same like way Buddy trusts the world's best coffee shop in New York. It's just very much felt like that.
And his like innocence of falling in love and all that kind of stuff. There's so many parallels. And now I'm maybe we'll have a deep dive for next week if I'll see if there's other people that feel similar connections between the two.
I've also, I don't think you've seen it or haven't seen it all the way through Dumb and Dumber, but I feel like his naivete I feel like influenced Dumb and Dumber and just the way that a lot of the lines from the movie and the way they saw things and jumped to the wrong naive conclusions. So I think this influenced that. Also some Forrest Gump, where it was like this long, story of his life where he was just like really dumb, makes a bunch of mistakes, falls into a whole bunch of wealth like Forrest does with the investment into Apple. I feel like that kind of stole from that a little bit. And then also a little bit of Scarface, which did come out a little before this. So I don't think this necessarily influenced it, but it was probably kind of making fun of or building off of that with his big, building wealth, his big study and desk with everything on it. You've at least seen like the Scarface like scene of that. And I think that was probably a direct like making fun of that. So I think there were a lot of movies that kind of either influenced this or were influenced by this that are otherwise culturally significant too. So I did appreciate all of that. Next note I have is when he's leaving his home, the leather hat and goggles. I feel like that was such a really cool like thing growing up, is that like the people were wearing the big like leather hats with the leather goggles and everything. I thought that was something I would like get when I was older and cooler and like a teenager or something.
File that under like the quicksand thing. Something that would just be more a part of it.
And I feel like no one does that anymore. And I'm surprised that hipsters and that group doesn't really buy into that nowadays.
That's true.
Like I'm gonna ride my motorcycle around with like my leather helmet and leather goggles.
I mean, just off the top of my head, I was like Snoopy had the leather hat and goggles. The little girl from Up, because we just watched that recently, and I feel like that's also in like Little Rascals. Just one of the kids have.
I would assume.
And that was just in the 5 seconds you were talking just now that I came up with all those things, and all of that is from like the 90s.
It's clearly not safe. There's a lot of issues with it, and probably not super comfortable.
Up was from like 2010, but like a lot of those things were like 90s and before that. It was just
when
something
that ever stopped
like
fashion hipsters?
It felt like it was going to be more a part of our life. Huh. Well, we'll have to also make note of future leather hat and goggles and see when that falls off.
Start a counter on that. Let's see, we mentioned. Did people ever really talk like that gas station owner? I feel like the whole like. I don't know what kind of accent that was. Like the wise guy. Was it like a New York accent or something? It just seemed like something you ever only hear in movies. And do people actually talk like that?
I don't know. Maybe? Now I feel like I need to hear it again. I mean, he definitely had something specific, but was it similar to that like transatlantic like Kennedy?
That's what I'm thinking.
Type accent.
Like that fake forced accent of that time, 60s, 70s would make sense.
It's probably very of the time period.
I feel like you don't really hear real people talk like that anymore unless they're being a caricature of something. The sniper was from Christmas with the Cranks. Pizza in a Cup. I'm pretty sure that was on Binging with Babish, or at least one of the YouTube cooking shows we've seen. And also, like, it sounds like crap at first, and I'm like, actually, I could say it'd be really good. I kind of would like to have some pizza in a cup.
I've had things in a cup that are pretty good. I mean, if Babby has it, I'd get. Maybe next week we'll start with it. No, just kidding. We have 2 kids. I don't have the brain power to come up with that before next week. But we can definitely try it sometime.
The random singing numbers. There was another one, and there's one last week in Blazing Saddles and one in this where they're walking on the beach. They're like singing, and he's playing some sort of like ukulele or something. She pulls out a trumpet. Obviously, they're making a joke, but I feel like so many movies had like these random singing numbers. And
I was not as surprised because I know, like to me, Bernadette Peters is a musical person. And I feel like you were like, oh, I recognize her from something. And I was like, oh, I think of her as musical things. And then, 5 minutes later, she's singing and playing the trumpet.
And this was obviously a joke, but it also kind of reminded me of when they sing Afternoon Delight in Anchorman. Of like, we're just going to just randomly in the middle of this movie just bust out into like this song. I think they're kind of making fun of that. I don't know if that was more of like a serious thing that happened in movies that doesn't happen as much now. Unless you're like, I feel like nowadays you either are a musical or you're not a musical. There's either like if there's any songs in it, it's going to be all throughout the movie.
And I think that's probably why like it feels weird to us because you are a musical or you're not.
I feel like Shrek was the last movie that I can think of to like kind of border on that line of like, are you a musical? No, but you had some singing in it.
But I mean, so far we're kind of seeing that the main actors and actresses singing in the movies is probably more common at this time, and it'll be something interesting again to watch every week because that's 2 weeks in a row.
The next I have is being rich before like technology and seeing the portrayal of being like really wealthy before there was like flat screens or smart homes or anything. It's just interesting how like the idea is I'm just gonna have all these big rooms with a bunch of like velvet couches
And the giant stuffed animal, like
Yeah.
stuffed real actual animals.
Yeah.
I giggled through that whole scene because it felt like, you kind of mentioned it already. It was the like callback to Scarface scene or whatever. All of it seemed like such a caricature of what being rich is. I'm gonna have this elaborate room, and I have the circle bed that spins, and this red velvet room, and this orange room, and the disco room, and just this very over the top.
It just seems nowadays like those, like if you looked at that house, even if it was kept like looking nice, you look at that house, you'd be like, what am I gonna do with all these random ass rooms with a bunch of like stuffed
Yeah, I mean, like, even, like, I think about, like, the Vatican and like, the places we went in Rome where it was like, is this practical? Did people really use all these rooms? Whereas, like, now we'd rather have, like, like, a theater room and, like, more invested.
A big open floor plan so you have everyone kind of here, but not, like, a bunch of random, like, themed rooms or, like, velvet bed rooms. Just I
mean, we don't even have a dining room that like the idea of having that feels weird.
At least you have like this big like garden, like outdoor area. I feel like that kind of makes sense, especially in somewhere like California. You don't have to worry about his bugs as much. You wouldn't really want that in Virginia because it'd just be miserable for most of the year. But I just always find those scenes funny of like, what do they do with like over the top money to just see a bunch of random weird rooms with a bunch of like.
I would also love to know how much money he really had from his. OptiGrad.
Yeah, well, he had 250,000, and they said he like had 750,000. Yeah. Then I'm like, nowadays, if you had like, a couple $1 million, it's not going to get you very far, especially in California. Like that's like middle lower class there.
For sure.
Depending on where you are in California. And then we did finally talk about the narration. So next up for your notes.
So I start off with saying that Steve Martin is the same. In a lot of ways, you see where he started from here. I mean, I don't know if he had movies before this. We'll talk about that next week. But this is obviously very early on in his career, and you very much see where his style of acting is very much the same as he goes on. But also at the same time, I feel like there were parts where I was like, you're not a great actor in this. Like, you are still very, very fresh in your career. And I see the building blocks of where you're going to be, but you're not that great right yet. It's a little like overly theatrical. Yeah. And I'm gonna skip down just a couple because then later I said like I don't know that I would have thought about how much of a physical comedian he is, but I feel like he uses his body for everything he does. It's all like how he dances or how he moves or his face, or it's so much of his comedy is dependent on his physical movements. And I don't know that I fully appreciated that until I watched this. Yeah,
he was very nimble in a lot of those scenes too. The way he danced, threw his legs around.
But even like I still think of a lot of the things he does today or in our lifetime, 20 or 30 years after this came out, still pretty nimble, like just a pretty bounce around there kind of guy. I said the humor, just like the racial based humor. Probably also a lot more prevalent after watching Blazing Saddles last week, where it was kind of already on my mind, and then it was like, oh, I guess this was just a theme in the 70s. Is this where our comedy is based? I don't know. We'll watch more 70s movies, but
yeah, I think it's probably going to be a lot more common in the 60s, 70s movies, and trending out very quickly in the 80s.
So we'll see how that plays out as we continue to watch things. And then I'll start like Hitchhiking. It just seemed like, again, another thing that seemed like it was something I was probably going to do in my life, where now I'm like, I would never stand on the side of the road and stick my thumb out and just get into a car with a stranger.
Yep.
I mean,
it's illegal now in a lot of places. But.
And I feel like a lot of that is also my personality, and that I'm not a super extrovert where I want to talk to strangers. But it just seemed like it was something that was very common.
I feel like nowadays hitchhiking would be safer because you'd at least have like a cell phone and some way to like communicate with people. But
very true. Can you imagine in 1970 something just sticking your thumb out on the side of the road and getting in the car with who knows who?
Is this not like is Uber not the modern day version of hitchhiking though? I mean, you generally aren't going like across the country, random like places like. But I think the idea ride sharing that's kind of like what Uber and Lyft are. You're
Okay,
getting the car with
you
random
got me.
strangers. It's probably safer now. I think it's still there. It's just not quite as random to an extent. There's some.
But I feel like there has to be
there.
some kind of accountability with like Uber and Lyft. Is they are working for a company and
they're doing background checks, and it's not.
There is a little bit more there than just
It's
who knows
transactional.
who on the side of the road, and like if they let me off in a not so safe place and I get picked up by someone, like there's a lot more variety or variability of what is and isn't safe, as opposed to I am being picked up at this location and you are taking me. Touche though, because you got me there. Still, just the idea of standing on the side of the road.
Yeah, I mean, I still love taking Ubers just randomly, like by myself. So,
and then I also made a note that he was making $1.10 an hour, and obviously he was very naive. And I don't know what the minimum wage was in 1979, but
probably was that.
But he was like so excited, and I was like, $1.10 an hour, 2023. That really hits.
Yeah.
Way different.
So then, if you think that he had like $2 million and multiply that by, say, with a 110 is equivalent to minimum wage ish, times 7. Having about $14 million, yeah, it'd be a bit more than, you could get by with quite a bit. I don't know if you'd have that huge mansion in California, but yeah.
And then I feel like that also,
if you're trying to blow all the money, yeah, you probably could get something nice.
I feel like I need to sit down and do the math of the $1.10 an hour based off of the Risky Business, which came out 4 years later, of the, what was it? The dermatologist made $60,000 a year, and the MBA was $40,000 or something like that.
So.
And just kind of seeing how all that works out, because I feel like there are some times where they just omit the money version of a lot of things so that they don't date the content of the book or the movie or whatever. But I'm really loving how this does date it, because I feel like it's
especially
so
if you
interesting
if you compare those amounts to like 2018 versus 2023. I feel like just in those 5 years that it's everything is kind of double also too.
That is true.
With all the crazy inflation and everything.
Yeah. So we'll do some math this week and check back in and see how those equate out.
Yeah.
And then I also made a note about the phone book. Like obviously he's very naive and very over the top when he gets the phone book and his name's in the phone book. But I also hadn't really thought about that, because are there even phone books anymore?
I feel like they used to just get delivered everywhere. I don't know if people like paid for that service or something, but I feel like my parents would just get like a new phone book every now and then. But
now
I don't think anyone gets them anymore.
Right. Like I don't think they exist anymore. And just
that's a lot of paper.
It is a lot of paper. Dunder Mifflin would have loved that.
True.
But I imagine I would be very excited to like become an adult and be labeled in the phone book and having a place that
nowadays everyone would be terrified that people have that information, and they would be more excited to not be in the phone book.
That is true. But I can see where it was a status thing of like, I'm in the phone book now, and just his enthusiasm, and that's something that has just completely died out now, which I thought was wild.
Nowadays you're more excited that you have your like own website or something like that.
I had a note about Elf. I was really proud of that connection. I'm
Sorry.
so mad you stole it from me.
I was trying so hard. I wanted to say it the whole time we were watching the movie, but I'm like, no, we have to save it for the after show.
Let's just take a quick second to talk about the experience of watching the movie together and not saying everything that we think during this is really, really hard.
Yeah. Because we usually talk so much more and say things, but I think we've like over the last couple weeks said less and less. Whereas now we're watching the movie, we're just like sitting there like,
nothing to say.
Just don't want to talk. Just
save that.
Yeah.
And I also
just pull our phone and take some notes.
Trying not to look at his notes while I write my notes, so that we don't.
Yeah.
So that because I feel like obviously the conversation is better when you don't know what's coming. But I stole my Elf thing because I was so proud of that connection.
Sorry.
We talked about last week about how there was a lot of scenes that were sped up and like the frame rate and all that stuff. And when the little boy was on the train, I felt like that was noticeable.
100%,
like noticeably sped up. Just interesting from a videography point of view. Also, Bernadette Peters' dress when she is like dating him in the carnival looks like she's straight out of the 1800s.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, it was just not even of the 70s. It was just like very, very outdated.
I just feel like also everything about her just I couldn't even imagine what she would look like in a modern day setting. Even just her hair, the crazy, like, her head just looked really small with how much, like, crazy frizzy hair. That I'm like, I want to see a picture of what she, looked like 20, 30 years later, because I just couldn't even picture it watching it. That it was very.
I think she would have thrived in like the 1890s.
Mm-hmm.
Like she thrived with the clothing and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
The dress really caught me off guard. And then similarly along the lines of the quicksand and all that kind of stuff, the cross eyes. I feel like the 70s and the 80s were really big on
going cross-eyed.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's something that like I remember being like kind of doing as a joke as a kid, and everyone's like, "Oh, your eyes are gonna get stuck like that," and it's not something that I just you don't see it on
also
TV
the thing
anymore.
of people are like,
just
if
not
someone's
a
going
thing.
cross-eyed and you hit them on the back of the head, they'll go cross-eyed permanently. And so people are like, don't cross your eyes. If someone hits you, like, you'll go cross-eyed permanently.
All those kind of like folklore type.
Can you imagine like running into someone like nowadays and they like eyes are permanently crossed? You're like, oh man, what happened? They're like, well, I was in 4th grade and I crossed my eyes and someone hit me in the back of the head and it's been that way ever since.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe like was that just like easy comedy back then, or or just something that was just a trend and then we decided that wasn't funny anymore?
Yeah, I don't know, because I'm trying to think what the modern day equivalent would be, and I just can't.
It's just, but it's like something like quicksand where you saw it a lot for a while and then you don't see it anymore.
Yeah. Did someone just like realize they could do that? It was first shown on film, and everyone had to do it for like 5 years, then no one did it. I don't know. I agree.
I don't know. It was just very weird. And then my last note is about the R rating. Just very end, like you had already walked away and the credits were still rolling, and that's something I thought about. So I think it'll be interesting to track, how our PG and PG-13 and all of that stuff kind of changes throughout the years.
So I think there are some movies, if you go back, that have a lot more like either nudity or like swearing, that nowadays would definitely be rated R, but they were like PG. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess you could show a tit in 1987 and still be PG.
My 2 VHS Titanic tape is rated PG-13, but I'm pretty certain it's rated R now.
Probably, yeah.
Because I remember being shocked that I was watching a PG-13 movie at like age 9.
Nowadays it would be banned from Blockbuster, and
also true. And then they moved it up to R, and I was like, oh man, I had to watch an R-rated movie as like an 8-year-old or whenever the movie came out. That I know that the ratings have changed a lot, so I think that'll be interesting for us to track. But yeah, that was The Jerk.
Still terrible title for it.
Yeah, so even saying it out loud,
I want to look into like how they came up with that, and whether it was like something they came up with a title for it and then came up with a story afterwards, because it just felt like, and maybe Jerk had like a different connotation in 1979 versus now.
And it actually might have.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting. I'll let you deep dive that one for next week. But.
Unless it was more of like it wasn't like a soda jerk, like wasn't that like an actual like the name of like the job title of someone who worked in like a diner that like actually did. I think that was a thing.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I have no clue.
So maybe it was. We'll find out. But yeah. The Jerk.
Yeah. Episode 5.
Yeah.
Done.
Decent movie. Weird title. But yeah.
Decent movie. Weird title. That's
Cheers.
sums this up. Yes. Cheers. Episode 5. Catch you next week.